Imagine a heavy reinforced steel door. It was installed with just a single protective purpose, right? To keep a group of over 200 high school girls safe from the outside world.
Right, to secure them while they slept.
Exactly. But what happens when the threat isn't trying to get in? What happens when the danger starts from within, and at 2 in the morning, that exact same heavy steel door becomes the very reason those girls cannot escape?
It's a terrifying, almost unthinkable scenario.
It really is. Today we are looking at a deeply sobering report. It's titled Justice in Ashes, the Utumishi Girls Academy Fire. And this is a tragedy that unfolded just days ago in Kenya.
Yeah, and the mission for this deep dive isn't just to, recount a terrible event. We really want to unpack the anatomy of a national tragedy.
Because whether you're listening to this right next door in Nairobi or across the globe, this is fundamentally a case study in how small, localized tensions can cascade into massive, irreversible disasters when warning signs are ignored. Okay, let's unpack this.
It is a profound and heavy subject, but an absolutely crucial one to dissect. Because disasters of this scale, they're almost never a single event.
Right, it's a chain reaction.
Exactly. It is a catastrophic chain reaction. And to grasp how that chain reaction became so lethal, we really have to start by looking at the physical reality of that night.
Yeah, let's set that scene and ground ourselves in the immediate facts.
Yeah.
We're talking about the early hours of May 28, 2026. The location is the Utumishi Girls Academy in Gilgil.
And the scale of this environment is just, it's terrifying when you try to conceptualize it.
It really is.
Yeah.
This was a single dormitory housing more than 200 sleeping students. 200 teenagers in one space. And in the middle of the night, a fire breaks out.
Yeah.
The reports from the scene describe thick, toxic smoke just rapidly filling the building. It trapped the girls inside so quickly that some students were forced to shatter windows and jump out just to escape the flames.
Just utter panic.
And the heartbreaking toll we're looking at today is 16 young lives lost and dozens more injured. I keep trying to visualize the logistics of that space,
That's hard to picture.
When you have over 200 individuals in a single sleeping quarter, how does the basic architecture of safety completely collapse in a matter of minutes? Think about a bottleneck vessel, like a funnel. You try to pour too much liquid through it at once, and it backs up.
Right.
But how does that actually translate to human bodies in a panic?
Well, the bottleneck analogy is highly relevant, but to understand why it's so deadly, we have to look at the physics of a crowd crush combined with the mechanics of a fire.
Okay, lay that out for me.
So when you're listening to this, you might picture a fire spreading slowly, like a campfire. But in a dormitory, you have an environment packed with highly flammable materials. Rows and rows of polyurethane foam mattresses, synthetic blankets, clothing.
Oh, wow. So it's not a slow burn?
Not at all. When a fire starts in that environment, it doesn't grow linearly, it grows exponentially. Within minutes, you can reach a phenomenon called flashover.
I feel like I've heard that term used in firefighting before. But what is a flashover, mechanically speaking?
It is the terrifying moment when the ambient temperature in a room gets so high, we're talking approaching 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that every single combustible surface in the room spontaneously ignites at the exact same time.
Wow.
It's literally an explosion of fire. And long before the flames even reach you, the synthetic materials burning in those mattresses are releasing carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide.
Ah, so that thick smoke the reports mentioned.
Exactly. It causes complete disorientation and loss of consciousness in seconds. So the students wake up in absolute darkness, choking, terrified, and their survival instinct kicks in.
Which means they all rush for the exits at the same time.
Yes, and this is where your bottleneck vessel analogy comes into play through fluid dynamics.
Wait, fluid dynamics? We're talking about human beings, not water.
I know, but in a state of extreme panic, a high-density crowd actually begins to obey the laws of fluid dynamics. People are pushed so tightly together that individual movement becomes impossible. The crowd moves as one solid mass.
That sounds completely suffocating.
It is. When 200 panicking people try to force themselves through a doorway designed for maybe 2 people to pass side by side, a physical arch forms. The bodies wedge against the doorframe and against each other, locking together so tightly that the pressure can actually bend steel.
So the flow of movement just drops to absolute zero.
Right. The architecture didn't just fail, the physical space itself became a weapon.
So the environment turns hostile instantly. And initially, in those first frantic hours, the response is entirely a rescue mission. It's about triage, breaking those bottlenecks, saving lives.
Naturally, yes.
But as we comb through the source material, the narrative in Gilgil shifted incredibly fast. It went from a tragic, terrible accident to an active crime scene almost overnight.
It was a jarring pivot, certainly.
Yeah, because early reports and witness accounts from the survivors pointed to a very specific chilling detail. A mattress had been deliberately set alight.
Right. The Directorate of Criminal Investigations, the DCI, stepped in immediately, and within just a few days, they arrested 8 students as persons of interest, declaring the fire was planned.
Which is wild. The authorities practically started building an arson case before the ashes were even cool. I have to push back a little on the speed of that investigation, though.
How do you mean?
How is that even possible to determine so quickly? Put yourself in the shoes of an investigator. You arrive at a scene with hundreds of traumatized teenagers who just survived a nightmare. The rumor mill must be spinning at absolute top speed.
Oh, absolutely. It's chaos.
One student thinks it was a spark. Another heard someone say something about a match. It's like trying to read a document while it's still burning. How do investigators separate verifiable facts from collective trauma and pure speculation?
It's incredibly difficult.
Especially when authorities are on television urging the public not to speculate, but they themselves are actively declaring it an arson case and arresting teenagers. I'm just having a hard time buying that they could be so certain so fast.
That is exactly the challenge investigators face. And what's fascinating here is how modern forensic science allows authorities to cut through that psychological fog of trauma.
Okay, so they're not just relying on the student stories.
Right, because you are entirely correct that human memory is incredibly malleable, especially during a life-threatening crisis. A traumatized witness might genuinely believe they saw something that never happened.
Because their brain is just trying to construct a narrative to make sense of it all.
Exactly. So the DCI doesn't rely solely on what people say. They anchor the witness statements to physical, unchangeable evidence.
But the room is reduced to ashes. What physical evidence is left to anchor anything to?
Well, fire is incredibly destructive, but it leaves an absolute blueprint of its behavior if you know how to read it. Investigators look for V patterns on the walls.
V patterns.
Yeah, fire naturally burns upward and outward in the shape of a V. By tracing the bottom point of every V in that tarred dormitory, investigators can follow the path of the fire backward to its exact point of origin.
Oh, I see.
And once they pinpoint that origin, say a specific corner where a bed used to be, they take core samples of the ash and debris, and they use highly sensitive equipment, specifically gas chromatography and mass spectrometry.
Okay, break that down for me. What is gas chromatography actually doing to the ashes?
Think of it like a molecular sorting machine. When they heat those ash samples in a lab, any chemical accelerants like lighter fluid, kerosene, or specific chemical compounds used to ignite a fire unnaturally fast will separate out into distinct signatures.
Even after a massive blaze.
Even after a massive blaze, microscopic traces of those accelerants remain trapped in the porous materials of the floorboards or the concrete. So if the DCI analyzes the exact spot the V patterns point to and finds a chemical signature that absolutely should not be in a dormitory bedroom,
Then the accident theory just vanishes.
right. Then they cross-reference that hard data with CCTV footage from outside the dorm, perhaps showing suspicious movement before the smoke appeared. And then, only then, do they look at the witness statements.
I see. So when a witness claims, I saw someone light a mattress in the back corner, the investigators aren't just taking their word for it. They look at the burn patterns and the chemical analysis.
Exactly.
If the science says the fire started in the front corner with kerosene, they know the witness is mistaken. But if the science matches the statement perfectly, the narrative logs in.
Precisely. The rapid arrests weren't a result of investigators just listening to rumors. They were a result of rapidly triangulating witness accounts against irrefutable forensic chemistry.
Okay, so knowing how the fire started naturally begs the hardest question of all. Why?
Yeah, that is the big question.
What could possibly drive a student or a group of students to set fire to their own dormitory, knowing 200 of their peers are asleep inside? If you're listening to this, you are probably trying to find some massive, deeply sinister motive to explain the loss of 16 lives.
You'd expect some grand conspiracy, really.
Right, but the source material reveals a motive that is deeply unsettling, precisely because it seems so, mundane.
It is incredibly disproportionate to the tragedy. According to the preliminary investigations, the tension within the school stemmed from disagreements over monetary contributions for a cultural event.
Cultural event?
Yeah, this dispute combined with a broader, simmering dissatisfaction within the school environment. It was a buildup of localized grievances.
Or a cultural event. I mean, here's where it gets really interesting, because we were talking about a concept I'd call tragic miscalculation.
That's a good way to put it.
The suspects reportedly told investigators that their intent was merely to stage a strike. They explicitly stated they did not expect the fire to cause any deaths. It's like lighting a match in a dry forest thinking you're just starting a small campfire to make a point.
Completely oblivious to the wind and the dead wood all around you.
Exactly.
Mm.
But I have to ask, how does a dispute over a school event escalate into a lethal act of arson? Where is the psychological disconnect that allows a teenager to strike that match?
Well, to understand that disconnect, we have to delve into adolescent psychology, particularly within the pressure cooker of a boarding school environment.
Okay.
The human brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for long-term consequence forecasting, impulse control, and a logical risk assessment, it does not fully develop until we are in our mid-20s.
Right. So teenagers are biologically wired to be highly reactive to immediate stressors and social dynamics.
Yes, while simultaneously being terrible at predicting worst-case scenarios.
So they're operating with a fully active emotional accelerator, but the rational brakes haven't been fully installed yet.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. Add to that the environment of a boarding school. It acts as an echo chamber. When a localized grievance occurs, like feeling extorted for a cultural event fee or feeling entirely unheard by the administration, that frustration bounces around the student body.
It amplifies with every conversation.
Exactly. Groupthink takes over. In the history of Kenyan schools, unfortunately, setting a small fire or staging a strike has sometimes been used as a drastic, albeit highly dangerous, tool by students to force the administration's hand.
Usually to get the school temporarily closed so they can go home and escape the pressure.
Right, so in their minds, they weren't conceptualizing mass murder.
They intended to create a disruption, a signal.
Yes. They thought they were striking a blow against the institution itself. The fatal flaw was their complete inability to foresee the reality of the physics we discussed earlier.
The flashover, the toxic smoke.
Good crowd crush. They couldn't forecast how quickly the environment would turn lethal. They thought they were controlling the fire, failing to realize the fire would immediately control them.
But if the students lit the match, we have to look at who created the environment that allowed that match to be so deadly. Because the investigation reveals that the blame extends far, far beyond the hands of the teenagers who started the fire.
It absolutely does.
We are looking at a classic Swiss cheese model of disaster here. And this is where the administrative accountability comes into sharp focus.
For anyone unfamiliar with the concept, the Swiss cheese model of accident causation illustrates how a disaster occurs. Imagine several slices of Swiss cheese stacked together.
Okay.
Each slice represents a layer of defense or a safety protocol, like a fire alarm, a teacher on duty, or an emergency exit. The holes in the cheese represent weaknesses or failures in those defenses. Usually, a threat might pass through one hole, but it hits the solid part of the next slice, and the disaster is prevented.
But in a catastrophic failure, the holes in every single slice of cheese align perfectly, creating a straight path for the hazard to pass all the way through to a tragic outcome.
Precisely.
And here at Utumishi Girls Academy, every single defense mechanism failed simultaneously. Let's look at those slices of cheese. Education officials reveal that some staff members were actually aware of the unrest beforehand.
Which is a massive failure in itself.
Right. They knew about possible plans to stage a strike or cause disruption before the incident even happened, and they failed to act. That's the first hole. Then you add the second hole, the overcrowding. 200 girls packed into a space that logically couldn't safely evacuate them.
Yeah.
But the detail that absolutely stops me in my tracks, the biggest hole in the cheese, is the locked doors. There are reports that some emergency exits were actually locked from the outside during the fire. Why would exits be locked? It feels like a catastrophic clash between trying to enforce security and completely abandoning safety.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the locked doors represent a systemic issue that plagues many institutions across the globe, not just in Kenya.
Really?
Yeah. It is the fundamental tension between security and safety. School administrators are often under immense pressure from parents and the community to enforce strict security. They want to prevent students from sneaking out at night. They want to prevent theft.
And above all, they want to protect the students from outside intruders. So they fortify the building. They install heavy doors, window grills, padlocks.
Exactly. The knee-jerk reaction to security threats is to lock everything down. But by turning the dormitory into an impenetrable fortress to keep threats out, they inadvertently turned it into a prison when the threat originated from within. Wow. Safety protocols dictate that a fire exit must always open outward and never be locked from the inside during occupation. When administrators choose to prioritize the prevention of a rule violation over the possibility of an evacuation, the environment becomes a powder keg.
You lock the doors to keep the girls safe from the world, and you trap them inside with the smoke. It's a catastrophic clash of priorities. And the tragedy is amplified when you realize this wasn't an unprecedented event.
It was not. Kenya has a deeply troubling history of school fires over the last 2 decades. There have been countless warnings, investigative commissions, and national guidelines issued.
On emergency preparedness and mandatory fire drills, right?
Yes, and the removal of window grills and proper dormitory spacing. The presence of locked doors and the ignored intelligence from staff suggest that the painful lessons of the past were completely disregarded at Utumishi.
So the administration possessed the knowledge to prevent this, but the implementation utterly failed.
That's exactly right.
Which brings us from the ashes of that horrible night to the stark, harsh reality of the present day. Today is June 2, 2026. The consequences of that night are playing out in real time as we speak.
The suspects have just appeared in court today, actually.
Right. Prosecutors are seeking more time to investigate the planning and the execution of the fire. And meanwhile, for the families, there is this grim, agonizing wait. Because of the sheer destruction of the fire, authorities are relying on complex forensic and DNA analysis just to identify some of the victims whose lives were lost.
This is absolutely devastating.
You think about that. You send your child to school, and weeks later you're waiting on a DNA match to know if they survived. For those grieving families, their primary focus right now is, understandably, justice. So what does this all mean?
That's the heavy question.
We have teenagers in a courtroom today, facing the heavy, blunt instrument of the legal system. But how do you put a broken system on trial? The law is incredibly adept at prosecuting the person holding the match, but it completely struggles to prosecute the administrative culture that locks the fire doors.
That is the central, agonizing tension of the aftermath we are seeing right now. The courtroom proceedings you mentioned are necessary, of course. The legal system has a specific, narrow mandate.
To establish the facts of the crime, determine individual culpability, and deliver justice for the immediate victims.
Right. The prosecution is going to focus on the CCTV footage, the gas chromatography, the intent to start the fire, and the resulting deaths. But you hit the nail on the head. The courts alone cannot fix systemic institutional failures.
Sending a student to prison for arson does not magically unlock a padlocked fire door in another school in the next county.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't create better counseling services, it doesn't teach teenagers how to resolve grievances without destruction, and it certainly doesn't enforce emergency preparedness plans at the administrative level.
Precisely. And that gap between legal justice and systemic change is why the Utumishi Girls tragedy has sparked such a fierce national debate in Kenya right now.
The public is demanding a broader accounting.
Yes. They aren't just looking at the students in the dock. They are questioning the state of student welfare. They're demanding to know why early warning signs are ignored by teachers.
They're forcing a conversation about the deadly reality of prioritizing property security over human safety.
Exactly. The courts will handle the criminal act, but this national debate is what will determine if the country actually learns from this disaster. Because if the conversation stops the moment the judge bangs the gavel on the students, the underlying conditions will remain untouched.
And history is almost guaranteed to repeat itself.
Unfortunately, yes.
And at the center of all of this legal and national debate are the families of those 16 girls, waiting for answers that might never fully explain the senselessness of it all. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to remind you of the core takeaway here. The Utumishi Girls Academy fire itself lasted only a few hours. The flames were extinguished by morning.
But the impact of those few hours will stretch on for years.
Right. For the survivors nursing unimaginable trauma, for the grieving families, and for the nation grappling with its educational system, disasters of this magnitude are rarely the result of a single isolated action.
They're a fatal intersection.
Exactly. It is that terrifying moment where unaddressed grievances, adolescent impulsivity, and systemic negligence all collide in a space where the exits have been padlocked shut.
It forces us to rigorously examine the layers of responsibility in any institution we trust with human lives. We have spent time dissecting the actions of the teenagers who made a terrible, tragic miscalculation, and we have analyzed the school administration that created a hazardous, inescapable environment. Which leaves us with a difficult, lingering question for you to consider long after we finish speaking today. If the students intended to stage a strike but never intended to kill, and if the school staff knew about the unrest beforehand but locked the emergency exits anyway, at what point does the negligence of the adults who were supposed to protect these girls become just as responsible for the loss of life as the match struck by the students?